And they're made up of all the same stuff, and so it's not like the herbivores did fall in and just didn't get fossilized. So I don't know.
So it comes, you have to think about the behavior of the animals at that point.
Yeah.
What would attract an herbivore into the tar, unless maybe an herbivore got stumbled in. But at that point, there's a meal waiting there.
So starting with that idea, other groups.
Maybe the carnivores got more protein, so they're both stronger, so
Okay, so it could be taphonomic bias in that way. The thing arguing against that is that the herbivores would actually have bigger bones typically, and so the bones would be more likely to survive.
So what you're saying is like a deer goes in and gets stuck, and then a pack of wolves come in to eat it, and all gets stuck.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what we're getting at too, right? So, these tar pits. I mean, looks sort of like a wet puddle or something. So you could have someone just not notice or just walk in and get stuck, right? Well, if it's a nice big chunk of meat, like a ground sloth, then it's there stuck. It's like can't get out. And then all these carnivores come by and say, "Oh, look, there's meat. Meat's not running away. Yay!" And they jump on the meat and start eating, but then they get stuck, right? And now there's even more meat, and more carnivores come in, and there's this great buffet, right? That's drawing in carnivores, and only rarely does the herbivore just happen into it, right? So it's thought that explains the bias.
Did none of those creatures have enough instinct towards self-preservation to see another animal getting stuck in it? Because, I mean, don't instinctually animals know not to, like, step into a fire or hop into a pit when they can't see the bottom or something?
Yeah, but I mean, this just looks like a wet puddle. So, so maybe they've detected someone, like, maybe they're smart enough to say, okay, those ones are in trouble, let me not go there. But all you need is, 10% to be idiots, right? And you collect those idiot ones. Yeah. But in general, I mean, if you're hungry and there's meat, it might be worth the risk. Right? Plus, I mean, tar pits are unusual. It's not like you've had a lot of evolutionary pressure through time to avoid tar pits. Right? There's only that little part where oil is coming out of the ground. Yeah, with like fire, it's common enough that there's an evolved response to it. Questions about this? So here we see a very great example of taphonomy at work, right? So we know some sort of trophic pyramid like this, probably with lots of herbivores, right? But we see something like this because of how things are fossilized, how things are preserved. In this case, it relates to the behavior while they're still alive. Okay. This tells something about like if herbivores moved in large herds and helped each other, you could see more groups of herbivores all staying stuck together. Okay. Or if carnivores only would eat things that were running away and wouldn't scavenge or wouldn't eat things that were trapped, then you wouldn't see this bias of carnivores. Right, so it tells us something about behavior just from this bias in who's in the tar pits. Okay. Here we see a person who's not a fossil in this rock face, right? And you zoom out, and there's all these dinosaur bones. Okay, this is a national monument. Okay, and it's a place where there's a large group of dinosaurs that are walking along, and they think a flood came down and killed the whole herd, and then deposited sediment on top of them. And then we have these fossils. And so there's actually some sorting based on, which dinosaurs, are pushed the best by a flood. Right? So there's like which bone pieces go first, and things are sort of disarticulated and broken apart. Okay. And this articulation came from the flooding rather than from, some scavenger tearing them apart. You tell it by the sorting of the sizes. Okay, something about how things died from fossilization. All right, so now the big question, if you want to be a fossil.
It isn't easy to become a fossil. The fate of nearly all living organisms, over 99.9% of them, is to compost down to nothingness. When your spark is gone, every molecule you own will be nibbled off you or sluiced away to be put to use in some other system. That's just the way it is. Even if you make it into the small pool of organisms, the less than 0.1% that don't get devoured, the chances of being fossilized are very small. In order to become a fossil, several things must happen. First, you must die in the right place. Only about 15% of rocks can preserve fossils, so it's no good keeling over on a future site of granite. In practical terms, the deceased must become buried in sediment, where it can leave an impression, like a leaf in wet mud, or decompose without exposure to oxygen, permitting the molecules in its bones and hard parts, and very occasionally softer parts, to be replaced by dissolved minerals, creating a petrified copy of the original. Then, as the sediments in which the fossil lies are carelessly pressed and folded and pushed about by Earth's processes, the fossil must somehow maintain an identifiable shape. Finally, but above all, after tens of millions, or perhaps hundreds of millions of years hidden away, it must be found and recognized as something worth keeping. Only about 1 bone in a billion, it is thought, ever becomes fossilized. If that is so, it means that the complete fossil legacy of all the Americans alive today, that's 270 million people with 206 bones each, will only be about 50 bones, 1/4 of a complete skeleton. That's not to say, of course, that any of these bones will actually be found, bearing in mind that they can be buried anywhere within an area of slightly over 3.6 million square miles, little of which will ever be turned over, much less examined. It would be something of a miracle if they were. Fossils are, in every sense, vanishingly rare. Most of what has lived on Earth has left behind no record at all. It has been estimated that less than 1 species in 10,000 has made it into the fossil record. That in itself is a stunningly infinitesimal proportion. However, if you accept the common estimate that the Earth has produced 30 billion species of creature in its time, and Richard Leakey and Roger Lewin's statement in The Sixth Extinction that there are 250,000 species of creature in the fossil record, that reduces the proportion to just 1 in 120,000. Either way, what we possess is the merest sampling of all the life that Earth has spawned.
It isn't easy to become a fossil. The fate of nearly all living organisms, over 99.9% of them, is to compost down to nothingness. When your spark is gone, every molecule you own will be nibbled off you or sluiced away to be put to use in some other system. That's just the way it is. Even if you make it into the small pool of organisms, the less than 0.1% that don't get devoured, the chances of being fossilized are very small. In order to become a fossil, several things must happen. First, you must die in the right place. Only about 15% of rocks can preserve fossils, so it's no good keeling over on a future site of granite. In practical terms, the deceased must become buried in sediment, where it can leave an impression, like a leaf in wet mud, or decompose without exposure to oxygen, permitting the molecules in its bones and hard parts, and very occasionally softer parts, to be replaced by dissolved minerals, creating a petrified copy of the original. Then, as the sediments in which the fossil lies are carelessly pressed and folded and pushed about by Earth's processes, the fossil must somehow maintain an identifiable shape. Finally, but above all, after tens of millions, or perhaps hundreds of millions of years hidden away, it must be found and recognized as something worth keeping. Only about 1 bone in a billion, it is thought, ever becomes fossilized. If that is so, it means that the complete fossil legacy of all the Americans alive today, that's 270 million people with 206 bones each, will only be about 50 bones, 1/4 of a complete skeleton. That's not to say, of course, that any of these bones will actually be found, bearing in mind that they can be buried anywhere within an area of slightly over 3.6 million square miles, little of which will ever be turned over, much less examined. It would be something of a miracle if they were. Fossils are, in every sense, vanishingly rare. Most of what has lived on Earth has left behind no record at all. It has been estimated that less than 1 species in 10,000 has made it into the fossil record. That in itself is a stunningly infinitesimal proportion. However, if you accept the common estimate that the Earth has produced 30 billion species of creature in its time, and Richard Leakey and Roger Lewin's statement in The Sixth Extinction that there are 250,000 species of creature in the fossil record, that reduces the proportion to just 1 in 120,000. Either way, what we possess is the merest sampling of all the life that Earth has spawned. Moreover, the record we do have is hopelessly skewed. Most land animals, of course, don't die in sediments. They drop in the open and are eaten, or left to rot, or weathered down to nothing. The fossil record, consequently, is almost absurdly biased in favor of marine creatures. About 95% of all the fossils we possess are of animals that once lived underwater, mostly in shallow seas.
Why?
There are fewer things there that are going to come and nibble on your bones.
Right, rainforests are going to decompose very, very quickly. Right, desert not so much. Actually, there's a lot of dinosaurs. You'll see them like in the neck be way back like this, right? Like this weird S curve. They didn't walk around like this. That's what happened. Well, when they died, their neck ligaments sort of dried out and tightened and pulled their heads up. There's also something like where their fossil was so they could sort of dry out that way. Oh, good. So here this shows the fossilization process. Right, so the animal dies, it's covered, it's buried quickly, you hope. Lots of rock from the top of it. Eventually gets worn away, right? And eventually at just the right moment, people come find it. Right? If they came earlier, back here, they wouldn't easily find it, right? If they came later, it would have all eroded and just be worn down to sand. Right, so not only do you have to find it in the right place, you find it at the right time too. Okay. Now, it's not the only way fossils have been found. So here's a child petting a mammoth. And it's actually a frozen mammoth. So in Russia, you can go and there are large areas of ice, and mammoths would fall into the ice and freeze to death. And then later, with global warming, hooray for global warming, they're all melting, so now you can find them more easily. Right, so you go and find, I actually went to Russia and saw some frozen mammoths, which were really cool. I didn't touch them. I'm not a cute kid. But yeah, you can find them. So there's hope for getting DNA out of them, things like that. Now we do have DNA from some fossils, so we have a full Neanderthal genome, based on this fossil data. And so we're working on getting fossils. Even some idea that you might be able to get some stuff from some dinosaur fossils. The DNA typically degrades quickly, but we did find some things like proteins in T-Rex bones. So you get protein sequences from T-Rex. The mechanism of fossilization is amber. Okay? And some trees, if you cut them or make a hole in them or a branch breaks off, sap oozes out. And sometimes the sap can collect things like insects, sometimes even lizards collect. And we know of amber from just a few places. So there's Baltic Sea amber. So on the some rocks that come up on the beach are actually amber. You might actually have things inside them. And there's amber in the Dominican Republic. I have to dig for it. Okay, and amber's used in jewelry and things like that, but it's also great for getting really good examples of really, really high detail. Okay, because unlike other fossils, you don't have lots of compression in them. You don't have lots of things breaking apart. You have the entire body oftentimes. There's fossil bees. You can actually go and look at the pollen, figure out what group of plants the pollen came from. Yeah.
If there was a mosquito in the amber that had sucked the blood out of a dinosaur.
Yeah, I don't think DNA survives very well, but I'm not sure. Yeah. I mean, the thing with DNA is that the water destroys DNA. Water eventually breaks DNA. So you have stuff in your body that can really repair DNA, right? But once it's sort of stuck somewhere for a while in water, it will break down. Actually, if you work in a lab and extract DNA, and put the DNA in water and just leave it sitting out for a while, eventually you won't be able to use it for things because it'll have all broken apart. But yeah, I don't think it's going to work. So I hope.
So, a little bit of a tangent from that. If I wanted to destroy some DNA evidence, I could just pour water on it.
And wait a while. Yeah, you have to wait a fair while. Yeah. And it depends on how much detail they want. And like, do they need the full genome, or can just get little snippets, little breakdown of little chunks and smaller chunks. Yeah. Okay, permineralization. So fossilizing. Okay, and so little parts within organism that become filled with minerals. Okay, so we can preserve lots of fine detail. Okay, so almost like being pickled. That's what happens with a pickle. You know, the liquid becomes, you know, supplemented with like vinegar, things like that. Here we have rocks. Okay. Compression fossil. You smush down. Right? Okay. And this will preserve, you know, structure this way, but won't preserve structure this way. A cast fossil. Let's think of making a plaster cast. Okay, so you make a cast, and then perhaps the organism itself eventually decays or is dissolved away, leaving just the cast. Okay, so this won't preserve any internal structure; will preserve the surface. Okay, so here is sort of a pathway showing how taphonomy works. Okay, so we have things that are alive, right? They die or discard parts of themselves. Antlers, something like that. Skin. Okay, and there's a filter there, right? Which things die, which things. So each of these grids shows a filter, a bias, right? All of that, it has preferences for certain things that go through. Okay. So things that are most common will die more often. They'll have more. There it goes. There's a pool of organic remains. Now what happens? Well, some are eaten by other things, right? Mouse chewing on an antler. Some are immediately buried. Some are eventually buried. Right? It takes them a while to get buried. They're exposed, and then you can have, so go back to the biosphere that way. The plant can be buried completely. Okay, and here, and now we have, we can have reworking. So we can have these buried remains could be sort of squished or transformed in some way, right? Or eventually they become rock. Okay, become fossils. They have another filter of collecting them. Right? And finally we get this set. And the hope actually is there's no filter here, but of course there's a filter here too. They omit. Right? Because the reconstruction can be wrong, or we can be biased towards. We want to find human fossils or dinosaur fossils, and things like, echinoderms no one really cares about. Any questions about this? Okay, here we see some sand dollars. And there are various processes that can happen on the way to a fossil. Okay, so you can have predation, and depending on how it's eaten, that can affect the fossilization. So if this was eaten by a starfish. We'll eat these, right? And sort of the way starfish eat is they take their stomach and squeeze it out, develop something, secrete stomach acid, digest it, then pull the stomach back in. Okay, so that's great for fossilization because it just kills all the organic material and then leaves the shell. That's the case. If you had something that was, say, a crab eating it, the crab had to break it open and then take things out, so already it's being broken. So predation can affect what happens to the fossil. You have decay, you have spinal articulation, all these different processes can happen, right? And so depending on which ones apply, we can get a well-preserved fossil or a poorly preserved fossil. So here we have a diagram showing living community. We have two axes. Taphonomic durability, how well is it fossilized? Right? And here I have ecological abundance. Right? So there are species that are always there, high numbers, and species that are only transiently there. Okay? And there's two ways of getting fossil assemblages: single event and time averaged. What do you think these mean?
If there was a single event that wiped it out, or if there was a time average, like they were having time to adjust, adapt.
No. Okay. So it's a good guess, but it's not right. So the liberated tar pits are time averaged. That helps you.
Would a single event be like a mass extinction?
A mass fossilization event, at least. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be, mass extinction means lots of species going extinct. It could just be in one particular area. It was a bad day, but right, it's like a single event. Yep, like a flood, like those like the dinosaur herd we talked about, or the Burgess Shale is thought to be. There was a large bank of seafloor that sort of fell and captured a lot of species and preserved them very quickly. Pompeii, exactly. Yeah, Pompeii is a single event, right? Whereas a time averaged is like the Bray Tower pits, just things keep falling in through time, right? So you can't say, okay, well, these fossils came from July of, 50 million years ago, right? Just sort of through a long period of time, lots of things accumulated there. Okay. And so they have different biases. So a single event is like a snapshot, right? Whereas time average is average through time. So species that come through periodically but are very rare probably won't be very common in time average. But those things are always there, will be. Okay. Questions about this? Okay. And here we see some time averaging based on existing things out there. And so things like plant litter can take up to a year of averaging. Wood, tens of years, hundreds of years. Right? Some kind of invertebrates, like a fossil bed of some seashells might have hundreds to thousands of years, all averaged into one group, one fossil area. Okay. Whereas event beds can be a lot shorter. Okay. So these will be averaged across seasons, across years, across some climate changes. Okay. Okay, here's you see some modern assemblages, right? So these aren't fossils; these are recent shells, right? You see this huge aggregation of them, right? And are these shells from that died yesterday? No, these are shells that died yesterday and shells that died 10 years ago, probably. All sort of averaged and mixed together. You see these are actually fossilized. If you want to see how did some slow shift in climate affect things, it's all mixed up. You really can't pick that up. Now, the video shows something about how rare fossilization is. Right? Well, one implication of this is that when you find a fossil of something, that species probably existed before and after that fossil. Right? You just happen to get one of them. Right? And so there are ways you can say, okay, if I have a species that's, here you have the same duration as this one, right? We only have 2 fossils, here have 4 fossils. And so what you can do is figure out information like sort of, if you think something is, you can get an estimate of how readily something fossilizes, how much good sampling they have. So if you have tons of fossils of something and then nothing, it's probably evidence that it went extinct then, or moved to a different place on the planet. Or we have just one fossil, another fossil. It could be listed for 10 million years before that or after that. You just by chance might not have that fossil. Does that make sense? Right. And then a sample size sort of issue. Okay. And there are actually here there's math, right? And it's actually very basic math. It's like flipping a coin sort of math. With probability of preserving fossil and probability of duration. There's ways of getting estimates, the confidence intervals on, how long did this species exist, given they found, 3 samples spaced this way. Okay. Okay. As we said earlier, where you can get fossils matters. Okay. So here is, North America with different layers of rock. Okay, and some of them are sort of recent volcanic layers. Some of them are old sedimentary layers. So old sedimentary layers will have fossils. Whereas recent like mountains of granite and things will not have fossils. Okay. So if you really care about a species that lived over here, okay, but on the right kind of rock there, you're not going to find it. Or if the nice kind of rock is, 1,000 feet down, you're not going to find it. Okay, so back to sort of where you can find fossils. Okay. So here we have sort of an issue with Lazarus taxa and pseudo-extinction. Okay, so what do you think these mean?
Pseudo-extinction, like they didn't really go extinct?
Exactly. So here's an example of one, right? So, look at this name change it would be. Okay, so if we went here, had this species, and then now I renamed this one a different species, that'd be a pseudo-extinction, right? So the lineage actually didn't go extinct, it just evolved into different species. But I mistakenly thought I had an extinction and speciation on that. That's pseudo-extinction. Lazarus taxa are the same species. They seem to have disappeared for a while, died, right, and then came back to life. Which obviously people don't think they actually came back to life. It's just a colorful term, this large gap. Okay. And so what this paper is looking at was a large period where we don't have fossil beds really available. Okay. And so people say, oh, there's no fossils there. And so this one must have gone extinct, and then something else evolved, something like that. We'll have lots of turnover, right? Lots of extinction and speciation. We actually have is the same species. We just missed that chunk. Okay. Make sense? We're getting that? It's like some television, some soap opera, right? Where you watch it and then watch it again 12 years later, and most of the characters have changed. You say, oh, well, this must be a new show. Maybe it's the same show, just been changing through time. That's pseudo-extinction. Okay, so what is it like to go look for fossils? Here you can see actually people on a fossil dig. So this is an area of exposed rocks, which makes sense looking for rocks, so it's easier to do it then than you have lots of vegetation. We should get to digging soon. There we go. People carefully digging up stuff. So it was a time when there was a race between Cope and Marsh, two famous paleontologists, to get lots of fossils. And so they would go through and find the area and dynamite it out and get the fossils faster. And only get the good stuff, like the dinosaurs and leave all the other stuff. There's about far more careful about, you care about what the environment is. So you care about what pollen is there too, and what insects are there. Right, done. That was more exciting than I remember. It was less exciting than I remember. Okay, here's more of taphonomy. Okay, so crabs eat hard-bodied things, right? They eat snails and they eat clams. Well, after clam dies or snail dies, a crab will come by and want to know if it's still its food. It doesn't know if it's actually the snail. You're not going to tell the snail. What do you do? Pick the snail. Good to eat. No. You pick the clam and say, oh, I see just one shell. It's empty. It's going. Right? And so what this does is, even if snails and clams die at the same rate, the snail shells will often be broken because of predation attempts by crabs. So if you were just to figure out why the snails died, you would overestimate the amount of crab predation because you see all these ones that are broken by crabs. But actually, much of that was crabs breaking them after they were dead. Whereas they don't do that to clams. I guess if you were looking in an old bed of 20 million years ago, look at clams and snails and see what was eating them then. You might overestimate predation on snails. That should correct for it. Right. Another thing that people are looking at with taphonomy now is actually people do experiments to see what modern processes do to fossils. Right. So we were mentioning the other day about someone who fed cow bones to all living crocodilians. Right, so you can see what the bite marks are. So you can see in the fossil record you find the bite mark, what size things are. There was also actual biological experimentation to understand these biases because they're so important. Another example is these shape biases. So, think of rock as hard, right? But rock is actually oozing and being squeezed and things like that. You go by the highway and see a rock cut. You'll often see just horizontal layers, right? You'll often see layers like this, diagonally. You'll see a curve, right? What is that? That's rock that's been squished and curved, okay? And so fossils that are embedded in that rock are also squeezed and pulled, okay? So the ways of looking at, fossils and then plotting on a diagram and seeing, you can tell what the original shape was and correct for that bias. Okay. Here we see what happens with modern sand dollars and paleo sand dollars. We're going to see what's happened between stuff that's recently died and stuff that has been through the process of fossilization. Okay. And so we see lots of evidence of non-lethal predation in modern stuff, evidence of lethal predation, but much less of that in the fossil data. Okay. We see some other things of crushing and things like that we don't see, or things growing on them. Like they've been lying on the seafloor and had corals growing them and things like that, more than in modern things. And I think if the same processes are happening, sort of see how changes happen through time on the way to fossilization. So here you see, imagine these are the same process, the same things are happening to sand dollars back in the Miocene as now. We get a very biased estimate of what happens from looking at fossils. So we have to correct for that. Okay, here's a very cool example. Here's a fossil forest of lycopsids. Okay, this stream, and then level went up, and all these plants were embedded in sediment and were preserved. And so there's now a coal mine. We're talking about coal as being dead dinosaurs, actually mostly dead plants, right? In some of the coal mines, you have great fossils. So here's a coal mine, and what there is actually underneath where those plants were. Okay, so you can look up and see the roots, see the root balls of lycopsids. Okay, all through this coal mine. And so here's what the plants look like. And they look sort of like modern trees. Actually, their bark is photosynthetic. Their trunks are photosynthetic, which indicates the life all the way down here. And also the way they grow wood is different. They don't have the rings that we have with modern bark. You can see some good examples of these in the McClung Museum. Okay, and this is a very big fossil site. So, we are here, right? And this coal mine is this size. Okay, and if you're in the coal mine, you can look up and see these channels, like these river channels that might be there. Between the channels, there's all the fossil trees. Okay, you see that the scale is the same, 2 kilometers. Okay, and again, that's us here. Okay, so it's a massive coal mine with lots and lots of fossil data. Okay. And that's again the process of forming it. All right, I'll give you a chance to read this. So read this and then tell me what it means. All right, so what does this mean?
So the way that you were talking about where the bones come from matters. Well, now we're not finding them where they actually came from. They've been moved by the hyenas.
Right.
Any evidence of behavior.
Right. Yeah, because the hyenas move them, we have this information that, and we know from modern hyenas that hyenas will move, move food items back to their den. So here we see evidence they're moving it. Good. And so it tells us that is behavior. What else would tell us?
Tell you which species we're being preyed on.
Right, so the analytes want to tell us which ones were in the environment, which ones are being preyed upon. Good. What does this mean? Here down.
The size of the bones, the ungulates were too large for the hyenas to have taken them down by themselves. There's probably evidence that larger carnivores had done the actual kill.
Right. Right, so, I mean, in modern Africa, hyenas are both carnivores and scavengers, as are lions. This is indicating that, at least with the food they bring back to the den, all they're doing is scavenging other organisms' kills. Right. Sounds good. So, what I'm trying to get across with this is that there are all these biases present, right? So, it's not where the animals died; it's where they were brought back to the nest. Some of them are broken up because the hyenas bit through to get the marrow. there's this bias in which ones hyenas chose to bring back, right? But by taking these into account, you can actually make inferences about hyena behavior. So from this, we know that hyenas were not hunting; they were scavenging, right? Just from looking at these biases. Okay, so taphonomic biases are a problem. We're missing all these nice soft things and that sort of thing. We're missing things from the rainforest. So these biases, but if you take them into account, you can get more information. Okay, so a lot of issues in science are like that, where there's a problem, but also if you're clever, you can rearrange your method to take some advantage of that too. Okay. Any questions about this? Okay. Why did I devote a lecture to it? Why do I think it's that important?
We're seeing actually a difference in behavior from what we see today. So you're also seeing evolution of this group preserved in the fossil record. And we're not finding just an evolution of morphology or shape, but we're seeing an evolution of behavior.
Right. Of course, macroevolution, so we see evidence of evolution from the fossils. That's good. And also, a lot of our evidence comes from the fossil record. Not all of it, but a lot of it. It's good to know what biases are there and what can tell you. Right? That's the importance of taphonomy. In this sort of biases into your data, I mean, they come up a lot in the fossil record. Actually, if you're looking at even like modern genomic sequences, and think about how do you get a list of variable sites across species. There's actually biases there too, ascertainment biases. And so you often see in scientific data these biases get to correct for. Right? And so it's good to think about biased data if we start doing too much science. Good. Any questions? Okay. Get clickers by next week, by next month, Wednesday. Okay, start doing clickers in class.
Oh,
What?
next week.
Okay, well, they'll be online.